This week we are going to be looking at the intention to create legal relations, and this is kind of the end of the beginning in terms of contract law. We've always talked about the four key elements of any contract, and so far we've already covered offer, acceptance and consideration. So by taking a quick look this week at the intention to create legal relations, we're sort of finishing off this area. And it shouldn't take too long, it's relatively simple. The main thing about the intention to create legal relations is that the contract must be sufficiently serious. In other words, if you agree to meet your friends at the pub at a certain time of the day and you turn up 5 minutes late, obviously that's not great, but you're not expecting your friend to sue you because of that. There isn't an intention to create a legal relationship there. So contracts do have to be sufficiently serious, and as said in Dalrymple, they're not mere matters of pleasantry and badinage. They have to be intended to create that legal relationship between the parties. So when we're thinking about this, we can kind of separate out this area into domestic agreements and commercial agreements. If we start with domestic agreements, we can sort of see that there is going to be a presumption by the courts in this particular situation that we're not creating a legal relationship. You can imagine a married couple where the husband agrees to sort of start making the dinner if the wife goes and picks the children up from school. Now, if the husband fails to actually start making the dinner, that's obviously again not great, but it's not the sort of thing that the wife is going to sue the husband because of. And so the courts are going to presume that domestic agreements are not creating that legal relationship. However, that is not to say that it is impossible in a domestic context that we can't create that legal relationship. There are going to be some contracts and agreements between, say, a husband and a wife that are going to be sufficiently serious as to create legal relations between the two parties. Now, it's a very difficult and fine line to draw, but we can sort of see it in these two cases that I've mentioned at the bottom of the slide. Firstly, in Balfour, the husband was working abroad and agreed to pay the wife £30 maintenance per month. In that particular situation, the court decided that this wasn't sufficiently serious to actually create the legal relationship. On the other hand, later on in Merritt from 1970, we had a situation where the husband and wife had separated. The wife was contributing towards the mortgage, and the husband agreed that if she repaid the rest of the mortgage, then he would transfer the property into her sole ownership. This all happened, but then the husband refused to actually transfer ownership, and the courts held that this was sufficiently serious. And so we can see in these types of cases that there is that sort of fine line and distinction that's going to depend on the facts of the case about whether a contract is sufficiently serious between, say, a husband and a wife as to whether it creates that legal relationship. In Merritt, we saw certain things such as the wife actually paying money and contributing towards those mortgage repayments, and also it having a sufficiently serious subject matter in terms of the actual property itself. One of the things that came up later on in the case of Pettitt and Pettitt from 1970 is that the performance of an agreement will actually be persuasive in this context. So going back to the facts of Merritt, the fact that the wife was actually repaying the mortgage is going to be something that the court is going to look at as persuasive in terms of the idea that the contract was creating a legal relationship between the parties. This doesn't just apply to a husband and wife though. Jones and Padavatten looked at the case between a mother and a daughter. The mother requested that the daughter go and study for the bar exam in London, and the mother supported the daughter at first by basically buying a property in London, allowing the daughter to live there rent-free, and then also renting out some of the other parts of the building so that the daughter would be able to use that money to pay for things like food and tuition. Now, unfortunately, the mother and the daughter then later had an argument, and the question was whether the agreement was sufficiently serious as to create a contract. Again, in this particular situation, things like the performance of the agreement led to the courts agreeing that there was an intention to create a legal relationship between the mother and the daughter. So it's kind of those similar considerations that we're thinking about. There'll be a presumption that there isn't a legal relationship, but it certainly is possible that one can be created if it is sufficiently serious. Other informal relationships can also attract legal consequences, so this is things like a contract between, for example, friends or roommates. In the case of Simpkins and Pay's 1955, a landlady and a boarder entered into a competition in a national newspaper. They eventually won the prize, and there was a question about whether they should have to split it or not, based on whether there was an intention to create a legal relationship between the parties. Again, it was said that this was sufficiently serious that a contract could be created between a landlady and a boarder, even though this is not really sort of a commercial relationship, it's more of a domestic one. So let's move on to commercial agreements, and in the same way that for a domestic agreement there is a presumption that there isn't an intention to create legal relations, in commercial agreements there is a strong presumption that there is an intention to create a legal relationship. But this can be rebutted, and so there will be commercial contracts where there isn't actually a legal relationship. A common example would be advertising puff, which was discussed in the case of Carlyle and Carbolic Smokeball Company, although that particular case failed. Nevertheless, there are modern examples of advertising puff where you can imagine it's not creating a legal relationship between the parties. You can imagine that the slogan of KFC, for example, as the chicken being finger-licking good, you're not going to be able to really sue KFC if you don't lick your fingers as a result of the chicken that you're eating. It's that sort of thing that we're talking about. It's something that's very obviously not creating a legal relationship. Second example is where there is an express declaration that the contract is not going to create legal relations. We saw this in the case of Rose and Frank Compton, in the case of in 1923, and also in the more modern case of Kleinwort Benson from 1989. However, even these decisions have actually been criticised in many ways because of the fact that the commercial relationship and the presumption that a commercial relationship is creating a legal relationship is very difficult to rebut. So even though we do have these examples, they're perhaps not the best ones, and generally speaking, all commercial agreements are going to create a legal relationship between the parties. Hopefully you found the intention to create legal relations relatively straightforward, and that should mean that there's some easy marks for you to pick up in an exam or a coursework either. Remember, any problem question is going to look at a contract or potential contract, and so you'll need to discuss all four of the key elements that we've discussed over the previous weeks: offer, acceptance, consideration, and the intention to create legal relations. To be honest, when it comes to the intention to create legal relations, this might only be one or two sentences, thinking about whether something is a domestic or a commercial agreement, and then thinking about whether the presumption has been rebutted or not. And for that you can use some of the case law that we've already talked about during this particular video. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more videos. We'll be covering more contract law as we progress through the year, and to also comment if you have anything that you would like to add yourself. I'll be back with another video next week, but for now, bye!